Hello, good evening. It's May 24th, 2021. Welcome to the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee meeting. Today, we're very happy to have Dr. Seiler joining us again to discuss the district's, give us an update on the district's progress in terms of the audit that we're conducting in terms of social justice and racial issues. We're very excited to see him tonight. It's very timely. We're getting a lot of positive feedback from our community members, giving us, a lot of support for this initiative. So also wanting to know what's going on and how fast things are progressing, things like that. So this is great timing. We're really excited to hear what you have to say. We're also going to discuss our English curriculum today. So we have a lot on the agenda.
Do you want to mention for the viewing audience the mask protocols that we'll be following in this in-person meeting tonight?
Okay, yes, we are all using masks, and any audience members that are here today are using masks and are required to use masks. When we are speaking, we are allowed to take off our masks just so that we are clearly understood for the camera. So before we dive into our main agenda tonight, we do need to take care of procedural issues, and we need to approve the minutes from our March 22nd committee meeting. So if anybody has any questions or concerns about those minutes, please let me know. Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes? So Dr. Hirsch, second. Okay, good. So those minutes are approved. So let's.
I'm sorry, just gotta take a vote.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course. So we all have to vote on approval of the minutes for the March 22nd meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Okay, so that's unanimous. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Crystal, who normally introduces our speakers. Dr. Crystal.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Best, and board members. Welcome, and welcome to Dr. Seiler. Dr. Seiler is a professor at the University of St. Joseph. He's a professor of education, and he's been working with us this year in several capacities to talk about culturally responsive and sustaining pedagogy. So Dr. Seiler is going to give us an update on the work that's been going on with our teachers, our coaches, our students, and ultimately the goal of this is to present a report to the board that will probably look similar to the report that Dr. Borland did about 7 years ago about when we did the study of gifted education in the district. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Seiler, and he's going to share our progress so far.
First, thank you all for having me here. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
So where we stand right now, obviously we've been slowed down by the pandemic. We have a couple of different steps that we were taking. One of which was to work with the teachers and coaches. So the first part of this process is I work directly with the academic coaches for social studies and English language arts. We had conversations about what their resources were, what their pedagogy was, how they're approaching providing the most perspectives for students. So not necessarily talking about revamping curriculum per se, but talking about ways in which they can broaden the amount of perspectives that the students are engaged with so that they can come away understanding more about the world as well as their content. So we met with the coaches. I met with the teachers twice. In meeting with the teachers, the first conversation was just about some of the broad ideas of what I bring, and this is what we spoke about in our last meeting. After that, we came back together to talk specifically about things that the coaches and teachers wanted more information on. They started to look at their own curriculum, their own pedagogy, and came back to me with ideas about things that they wanted more information on. So some of that was pedagogical resources, some of that was specific content resources. Where they are in the process now is they are engaging in an audit of their own curriculum and their own pedagogy in their classroom, so that we can make sure that anything that I provide to them to kind of build up their toolboxes is rooted in their needs, as opposed to me coming in and saying, here are the things that I think you should be doing. So they are using the culturally responsive scorecard as kind of a guideline to help them look at what they're doing in their classrooms, look at their resources, and we're going to come back together. And we haven't determined exactly when that would happen. but we're going to come back together to look at the results so that anything that I'm giving to them is more in a role supporting them and supporting their academic freedom, supporting their what they feel like their students need. The other part of what I have been doing is working directly with student groups. So I have met with student groups, 2 larger groups and some individual interviews, with the idea that we aren't just looking at this from the standpoint of administrators and teachers, we're also getting student input. So there have been a mixed group of students that we've spoken with, kind of following the line with along with the Borland report. My goal is to have a report to you all some point in the summer. Now that I think the last interviews were last Friday, the previous Friday. So now that I have that data, I need to be able to go back and start analyzing and really organizing the information and seeing what comes from the data that I got from the students. So that report should be to you, I'm assuming at some point over the summer. Right now, we're just doing overall analysis. Just to follow up, one of the main things, as Anita mentioned, one of the main things that we've been focusing on is culturally responsive and culturally sustaining pedagogies. So we have tried really hard to make sure that the goal of what is happening is to provide students who are from the more marginalized groups with areas in which they can see themselves in the content in order to build up connections. All of the things that we're doing, as I mentioned in the last setting, all the things we're doing are intended to be rooted in the research about learning, research about education. So we are trying to find more ways to establish relevance for the students, but find a way to do it that's pretty across the board for all students. So right now, the next step with the teachers is to meet with them again and talk to them about, or to hear from them in terms of what they developed with their own use of the scorecard, as well as me working on it. Yes.
Dr. Seiler, what grades are you interviewing?
I'm sorry?
Which of the student grades is it just high school or is it?
It was just high school.
Okay.
Yes.
And how about the teachers? Is it the high school teachers
That I've met
only?
with. I believe it was high school and middle school.
And middle
Fu-
school?
The
5 through
teacher
12.
group is 5 through 12,
Yes.
and it's high school students, but I believe that you're giving them opportunities to talk about their whole experience in
Yes.
Guilford schools.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Yes,
Thank
and,
you.
and just to give a little bit more clarification, thank you for that. In the interviews with the students, I use the re-interview format, which is intended to, instead of interviewing the student and just saying, so what's going on? With the 3-interview format, it gives you an opportunity to start off with having them look back, having them reflect upon their own experiences, and then using questions to kind of pull them towards the present. So then the second step of the interview process is to get them talking about how they're feeling, in the hopes that they'll be able to establish exactly what the distinctions are. Usually when you're talking about high school students, what they will say is, elementary school, I loved it, everything was great, my teacher was really sweet. I went to middle school, things got serious. That's the typical thing, but you don't want to say, how was it in elementary school, how was it in middle school? So using the questions to kind of walk them forward. But then the third step is, once you've established kind of a conversation about how they're feeling about where they are right now, you start to get them to project. So you go from reflection to projection. And that projection includes asking them about what they want to see, if they want to see something different in the district, if they want students coming after them to have a different experience, do they want them to have a similar experience? Where do they plan to go and how do they feel like their interactions and their experiences in this district have led to that? So that's kind of that 3-interview format, is to kind of take those steps and move the students forward. So for each of the meetings that I've had, first really large group, slightly smaller group, and then individual interviews, I've stuck with that same format. It just had to be edited a little bit for the size, because I could individually, I would have been talking to the large group for 7 hours.
Can you tell us how many individuals you've interviewed at this point?
One-on-one,
Yeah,
or just 2 students.
okay, okay.
Overall, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think the first group was
30.
Yeah, the first group was around 30. Second group was about 12 to 15 for the second group, and then it was individual interviews from that second group.
How did you end up number 2 from all those?
Well, we were specifically looking to eventually interview some students of color, and the way it started to break down was that I needed to choose obviously from students of color in those other groups, but then I also had to look at students who had unique things to say. And I didn't want to choose two students who were basically mirroring and echoing each other. So I was able to get really interesting, you'll see when the report comes out. There's a really interesting overlap, but there's some interesting juxtaposition between the experiences.
You're interviewing teachers as well?
I am not interviewing teachers. I've been working with the teachers in large groups, talking about the pedagogy and resources. But the goal of the interview process is to hear and understand things from the student perspective and to see how they're viewing this school world overall.
Well, it strikes me, based on research studies that I've looked at, that M equals 2 is kind of a small sample.
When you're engaging in phenomenological research, the goal is to see that it's more about the depth of experience as opposed to generalization. It's not necessarily about, can we generalize the experience of these two students of color to the entire district? It is about how richly and deeply can we look at what their experience in this district has been overall. So it's more about the richness of the story as opposed to being able to generalize. The goal of this is not necessarily to say, here are all the experiences that I'm able to find for students of color. The goal is to say, here are two students. Well, we wanted to have a couple more, but it just turns out that that's how the numbers worked out. But in terms of phenomenological research, the goal is to look at the richness of the individual stories.
No, of
Dr.
course.
Sorry, so,
Sorry.
so the group of 30 or so that you started with, were those all students of color or a mix? Oh, so it's a
Yeah.
mix of students?
Yes, it was a mix of students, and we had some back and forth about who the students were. We wanted to hear from students who were active in the school community, students from marginalized backgrounds. So we wanted a pretty wide swath of students to start with, just so that there was some baseline for how the students were feeling overall in terms of the district.
So that's wonderful. So then, so a discussion in the larger group, and then the second group of 12 to 15 were not duplicated from that group of 30, but
Some of them
some were
were.
and some weren't. Okay,
Yeah, the second group was Black and Latino students.
okay, wonderful. All right, thank you.
And again, I'll say, the larger group conversation, all of the conversations are extraordinarily generative. They're not shy. by any stretch. But also what always happens in these settings is that there is a concern, and me as a researcher too, there is a concern that when you start asking teenagers about school, they're just gonna rail. They're just gonna, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, it's terrible. But what always comes out with the final finding is always that the students themselves have had an array of experiences, and allowing them to talk about the experience is helping them to process. So when I'm working with the teacher, we talk a lot about the importance of reflection, not as a assessment tool, but as a generative learning tool. So reflection is not necessarily, and please forgive me, y'all educators, I don't mean to condescend, but looking at reflection.
You're helping me, so feel free.
Looking at reflection not as this is how I know they know it, but reflection is like an internal version of transfer. So the student is sitting there and they're taking something. It's like if I said, what's 32 times 5? Somebody in here gets it like that. But then if I ask you to verbally explain it to me, what you have, the processes that have to happen in your brain will take you through and allow you to better understand your own innate responses. So having the students actually have a conversation about their experiences allow them to undergo some of those same innate processes. They were thinking about, well, did this really bother me? Did I really like this? Did this person upset me? Did this teacher help me? How did the teacher help me? Why did this? So in just having them talk about these things and making sure that the questions were going in a direction and didn't allow things to get just to the point of rambling, it really did make it so that there was no, like there's always a danger of it just be a bashing session. And it just were not. None of them were. None of the sessions were about the students saying, I hate, I hate, I hate. They were all about saying, so here's what I experienced. And then the next student would say, I experienced something just like that. And here's how it felt for me. And so it helped to break down barriers between the students, but it also helped to give me a lot of information about how they were feeling in terms of their experiences.
Wonderful, thank you.
Correct me if I misunderstood. Please correct me. You were talking about Tracy was asking a question about how you got the groups of students, and I think you said that you met with students who are heavily engaged in school and different activities at school.
Some of them were, I'm sorry.
My question was, if that's the case or not, were you able to capture some of the students that maybe aren't engaged and find out why they're not?
And that's what I was gonna say. Let me know if I'm incorrect. Some of the students were the more engaged students, some of the students are vocal, some of them are engaged in the school community through different organizations. Other students were just students who are either connected to them or know them. So it was not just a group of, like, it wasn't one organizational group, it was a group. So we kind of did convenience sampling, for lack of a better term. And what we ended up with, especially in the last two, we had the very low key student who doesn't necessarily speak very much and is very not involved in a lot of things in a more boisterous way. And then we had some students who were much more boisterous. So it ended up with a pretty good balance. But I would say, I mean, if you wanted, the official term would be that it was convenience. We wanted to interview more students of color at the end. It was just the way the numbers broke down, especially at this time of year. We didn't want to try to force things and start like going and searching for students, because then it removes the sense that they've chosen to be involved in this. And it's more, there becomes pressure if the principal starts looking for them.
Julia's like,
So Dr. Seiler, does that mean that the two individuals that you interviewed volunteered to be the ones who were interviewed? Gotcha, okay.
Yes, they were asked if they wanted to participate. One was very, very, very excited. The other one was excited. It was just that one was like, you could tell from the first session that one wanted to keep talking. The other one was much more low key, but still expressed a desire to just have more conversation. I mean, that's how we found it. It was really me asking questions. None of the questions were, how many times did somebody bully you in school? None of the questions were leading. It was all questions like, how did your family talk about school? What is it? That was one of the background questions. In your household, how is education discussed? And it allowed them to kind of say, my mother talks about this, my cousin talks about this, and it lets it become much more free flow. But I know that every time y'all ask a question, I end up all over here.
no.
I'm just wondering if you can share your impressions. I know you're gonna produce a report. It's gonna be very data driven. Is there anything you want to kind of share in terms of just your impressions and your background?
I was gonna make a joke, but I don't want to.
Take a joke.
Spike anxiety, so I don't no, there were no, like, I was very intentional in saying that it did not become a complaint session.
Yeah.
Because I didn't feel like the students themselves saw the district as a problem. There were students who had some concerns with the overall community and whether or not they've always felt welcome in the community. But I did not hear from the students that the district itself was a problem. What a lot of them talked about was sometimes it was specific teachers, sometimes specific classes in specific schools where they felt really welcome. So you can kind of explicate that there are other places where they felt less, but from their perspective, they knew that was a session. I mean, there was a member of the staff who was there, but that was more in case we talked about something that upset one of the students or it made them feel uncomfortable. We wanted to make sure that they had support. But for the most part, it was really about their individual interactions between each other. They did talk about, sometimes they discussed, one of the things you'll read the report is my thoughts and recommendations around administrative responses to incidents, with the understanding that the administration can't just respond the way that a 16-year-old wants them to respond. It's not, there are a lot of other layers, a lot of other things that need to consider. But for the most part, the students themselves seem to be joyous just about being able to say, I had these experiences. And those experiences were pretty consistently centered in their relationships with each other. So the only thing that really went to the administration was a conversation about how they felt when a student did something that violated school culture or hurt them. We didn't talk about any physical violence, but when they felt disrespected, when they felt there was a racial incident, they worried that the administration wasn't always as aggressive as the students thought they should be.
Mhm.
The other part of that is the administration can't talk to students about what someone else's consequences are. So they're only getting part of the information.
Sure.
So a lot of what I talk about in the report is going to revolve around the way that the students are feeling and developing and looking at the ways that the school community can kind of grow and show ongoing support. So even if it's not the administration saying, here's what everybody's penalties are, it can just be having conversations with all students involved and making sure that at the end of the process, all of the students feel whole, or at least feel heard. But I was a little surprised, just because I really did expect them to make it more of a complaint session, just based on the nature of their age. But I would say,
No, go ahead, Fanny.
I would say that what you'll probably see the most is there is some consistency about their experiences. Most of the issues that they ran into are peer issues. They had questions about the administration, and I think part of that is because they don't understand the administration. But there's a lot of good information in there about what they want things to look like in the future. In terms of others, they talk about other students. Some of them talk about siblings, talking about where they would like things to go in terms of what happens in the classroom. So we talk about content pedagogy, but we also talk about school culture in general. So there will probably be some kind of generative thought coming out of that work about where they want to see things for future schools.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask if there was overlap into the teaching and learning conversations that you've been having with the coaches and the self-study conversations you've been having with social studies and English teachers.
And with the student interviews, it didn't set out for that to happen. So I didn't ask any questions. I did ask them if there were things in the curriculum or in their classrooms, in certain classes, that helped them to feel more or less seen or more or less comfortable. And from that, there were students who pointed out some specific things that they saw, but again, it was more about what they would like to see happen. So it will be more about what they want for future students, how they think things should go. I think that's going to be the more, but that'll be in terms of discipline, that'll be in terms of the school community, but definitely content.
So let me see if I can put this in context. We have publicly stated that we're engaging in an audit, which involves the existential nature of what it means to be a student here, which is a lot of what we're getting at. The curriculum, and whether that is up to snuff on any number of standards, school culture, and pedagogy. And it sounds like the piece that you're doing now is starting with students, getting a sense of what's in or out of balance from their experience. So in that sense, it's existential from their point of view. There's been very little at the moment in a formal way of looking at the curriculum as it is versus the way it ought to be. By that I mean we've had graduates who overwhelmed us in this last year, angry by what they didn't get here, and were articulate and constructive. And I assume at some point our audit will get at all of that stuff as well, and that what we've done so far is
I'm listening.
an introduction to the. I mean, it's the beginning of. It's a piece of the audit. It's not. So we can't say very much. The reason I'm asking is we've got people out there who are vociferous critics who already believe that we're going to impose, if not having already imposed, an anti-racist curriculum in the way that some of the books that have been out there, Candies and others, that we're purposely trying to make white students the burden of things. And as I hear it so far, that's so far from what we're currently engaged in, which is what we ever intended. And I just want that to be clarified, because I think there's a lot of misperceptions and misrepresentations of what it is we're engaging in. And so, have I said anything that's strange about what we're doing?
No, I mean, to be clear, the audit is built on a self-study, and we've always talked about it in that way, that the audit is built on a reflective self-study facilitated by Don, conducted by the teachers. I guess the question that I'm hearing is, again, we know that this isn't the final report, but in this progress report, are you anticipating any broad recommendations that the overall curricula are flawed structurally, pedagogically, that need to be changed? Or will you be making recommendations within the broad existing structures?
So right now, where we are in that process, especially in terms of the audit, is that the teachers they have the tool. They have been looking at their work. We just haven't been able to get back together to talk about what they've seen and what they've developed and what they've thought about their work. So the audit is on go. They're in the process of doing it. But I would yes, agree with you. With this is not so. There's a distinction between cultural responsive and sustaining pedagogies and some of these other things that are out there. My expertise in me being brought into this is specifically about broadening student perspectives and addressing student needs. So we haven't had any of those conversations with the teachers about, we've talked about the importance of student needs being met. And we talked about the importance of hearing things from more perspective than what we currently have. But right now, the audit is about the teachers looking at their own tools, looking at their own resources, and then we discuss as a group what resources they need, what resources they can share with each other to kind of build each of their toolboxes. So we're not trying to bring in a new reading list or anything like that. We're trying to see what resources they want and need to broaden their own teaching. So I think the example that we talked about before is in our meetings, one of the teachers talked about she has a maritime literature piece that she always does. And one of the struggles that she deals with is that she finds herself keep coming back to Melville, coming back to Moby Dick. The problem with coming back to Melville and Moby Dick is that it's a very narrow little sliver. It's pretty outdated. It has some really jaded, kind of dated language in it. So we talked about being able to look at Inuit and Japanese whaling traditions and kind of the backgrounds behind those and indigenous whaling populations and how the belief systems affected the ways that they view whaling. So that's really the work that we've been engaged in, is the teachers auditing and looking at their own work and determining whether or not their pedagogy is actually open for all students. The language that they're using in the classroom, the practices they're using. When I say pedagogy, I'm talking about how are you differentiating? Are you incorporating the arts? One of the big things we've been talking about is the intelligences and incorporating the arts into the curriculum to make them more all-encompassing for students. But yeah, the audit aspect of it is ongoing. We just haven't had the time to meet to actually discuss what the teachers need and what they found in their curriculum.
And to be fair,
I haven't seen anything, especially with the what I've seen in terms of the resources that the teachers have. I was actually kind of buoyed by seeing the breadth of some of the things that are already covered. So no, there's not going to be any giant curriculum recommendations. It's going to be what the teachers have determined that they need more information on and that they want to pursue in order to broaden.
to be fair, I just want to add, we believe that building this on the teachers is the right thing to do. The teachers are the experts, the teachers have the knowledge, the teachers are the ones who will impact the student learning. But what we've just described would be a heavy reflective lift in a normal school year. And so the idea that we needed to slow this down, and quite honestly, the idea that we will have it complete even over the summer when the teachers sit at the core of that, and we're asking them to be reflective broadly about their practice in a year where they are in survival mode to a large degree. The high school didn't open to full even 4 days a week until just a few months ago. And so again, it's the right design. It's a difficult year to move that design and expect the teachers to be able to do that heavy lift, even with support. So I just want to be generous to the teachers' time and the expectations we're putting on them. Even though we've designed it the right way, we designed it the right way in a really challenging year.
And the administration was very clear with me that my job is to support the teachers in what they need, developing their pedagogy. So I think, and from what I've heard, the audit is ongoing, the teachers are looking at their information. I have been able to talk to a couple of them over the last few months in terms of some of the things that they want.
I have a question.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
do you want to go?
Go ahead.
So just to piggyback on Dr. Hirsch a little bit, we have really heard so many people support this work. It's really nice to see the enthusiasm in our community and to hear their support. But there are a couple people who've been extremely, concerned and have certainly let us know that, specifically around this idea of critical race theory. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and just help us understand, maybe a little bit of a perspective and how what your work, and your intentions differ from that, just so we can really get that on the record, I think.
So I think there's a tendency to loop anything that relates to anti-bigotry, anti-racism, all together with kind of these dangerous and scary notions. So every time you hear critical race theory, it's actually harkening back to fears that people have about critical theory in general, Marxism in general. Critical theory is in its nature a theory about being critical of it. It's
Hence the name.
literally what education is supposed to be based on, is we're trying to churn out these students who can look at the world, critically analyze it, especially as this information is becoming more and more ubiquitous and coming at us faster and faster, more and more forms. They have to be able to critically analyze it, develop an understanding of what it means, and then move past it. Critical race theory is the idea of examining things in that way as it pertains to race, socially, economically, politically. That's what critical race theory is. The same thing exists in gender theory. Critical gender theory is looking at how patriarchy and misogyny have had a root or had an effect in the way that societies run, the way that people engage with each other. With these critical theories, there's queer theory, like all of these different theories do the same thing. They look to see, all right, so here is society. Society exists as this functioning machine. What critical race theory does is it looks at, so here is this functioning machine. What role does race play? So let's think about it like a car engine, right? The car engine is this really complex system. Internal combustion, but you don't just have gas going in and exploding. You have gas, you have oil, you have coolant, you have all of these different things. So critical race theory is looking at this machine and saying, all right, let's specifically look at what role the coolant has played in this. Because the coolant itself, absent the coolant, it's a completely different machine. It doesn't function the same way, or it doesn't function at all. Absent the oil, same thing. Absent the gas, same thing. So just looking at race, looking at gender, looking at sexuality doesn't necessarily automatically make something bad. It's just a different way of assessing how these things interact and what role that plays in how the bigger machine functions. So with critical race theory, I think that people who are uncomfortable with critical race theory, and I'm not here to cast aspersions, our work is not rooted in critical race theory. But I think that the folks who don't like critical race theory, it makes them anxious, or it bothers them, or it is not their way of viewing the world, because it tells people that you have to question things we don't normally see as questionable. And that is a natural phenomenon for people to become uncomfortable or disquieted when you're asked to confront something that doesn't fit with your world. It's like the people who go through the genetic testing, and then they find out that their great grandfather was actually a pirate and like did all kinds of terrible things. There's this moment where they're like, no, that's not, no, that can't work. That's not how. And it's not because they don't understand it. It's because it is forcing them to address something else. The work that we're doing is not rooted in critical race theory, because we are not looking specifically at the role that race plays in education. We are looking at the experiences of students of color so that we can better serve the needs of all of your students. We are looking at the pedagogy to broaden perspectives across the board. Critical race theory, if we were taking a critical race theory approach to this, we would absolutely be looking specifically at what what role does whiteness play in Guilford?
Mhm.
That was not one of my questions. That's not something that we're addressing. Some other researcher you might bring in might look at that.
Mhm.
But once again, my goal is to be kind of a support for the teachers pedagogically in terms of content. But like I said, critical race theory is looking at society from the perspective of how race has shaped things. It does not remove anything else. It doesn't cancel other things out. It's just a different way of analyzing information.
And to be clear, we've been saying in Guilford for 20 years that we want students to be critical thinkers and critical learners. And we apply that to all subject areas. At an earlier CIA meeting this year, we looked at examples of critical thinking applied to other subject areas other than social studies and English language arts, and to topics that were not race or equity or social justice. We have embraced the idea of critical thinking, I think, for more than 20 years in the school system.
And I assume that in most school districts, we had a conversation, I think we talked about it in our last meeting, about the importance of school districts establishing what the point is of school. If the point of school is just to graduate students, then you're not holding yourself responsible for any of the outcomes. And as you just mentioned, they're coming back and they're saying, I wasn't prepared for this world. I wasn't prepared for this experience.
Yep.
The more perspectives they see, the better they understand things, the more stories they've heard from their peers, from the content, the more different ways they've explored things, the better prepared they're going to be. And I think when I think about people who are disquieted by critical race theory as a concept, it's not what we're doing, but when people are disquieted, I think about the fact that we can objectively treat, we can teach Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam in school with an understanding of the students are going to be able to critically analyze. Is this my religion? What do the beliefs look like? Like, how do we break these things down? So back to Dr. Freeman's point, you're trying to have students come out of school being critical thinkers and being able to look at the information and make informed decisions based on that information. Critical race theory as its own separate thing, it's almost like, why are you trying to make our students into social scientists? Or why are you trying to make our students into psychologists? It's a field. It is a theoretical concept that people do study. It is not something that's necessarily, I have never heard of it being something where somebody comes into a school and says, let's now teach your students critical race theory, unless it was being taught the same way that Buddhism or Islam or any other religion or any other cultural aspects would be taught.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Kristen, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it was really on quite the same topic.
I see.
I just wanted to, I guess, just get my head around that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So my understanding then is that we are really looking at the audit as a means to add a book or some kind of content to the already existing program. So if I'm an 11th grade English teacher and I'm teaching 11 texts this year, I might just want to add another pamphlet in or another book in so that what's existing is continuing to exist. And we're not changing the curriculum. We're not doing anything to upturn what we've currently got. We're just looking at ways to maybe add something else in that's going to give a wider world view or a wider view so that students might be able to find something in a text to which they can identify where perhaps there was a void in that existing curriculum. We're not changing the curriculum, it's staying as is and just possibly adding one more piece so that a student of color or a student who's gay or whatever they may feel is a marginalized way of being, that they're feeling like, okay, this is a character in a book to whom I can relate. So I'm feeling like I can be included in this English class. I'm not feeling like everything that I'm reading is exclusive of my own way of my self-view. Is that correct?
That's part of it. I would say that it's not necessarily just for the marginalized students, but it's also for the other students to be able to understand the world better. The world does not exist as a lot of older literature expresses it. So having all of the students be able to see the world much, much more clearly. And I think like that old term, that old idiom, the rising tide lifts all ships. I think that's a little problematic because, if you have these ships over here that are struggling, then the other ships don't really need to be lifted. But they can at least understand what the plight is and understand what the experiences are like to better understand, maybe they are making waves. So just to make sure that all of the students are getting a much more well-rounded. So no, we've talked about the curriculum as it stands. The curriculum itself is not problematic. We are just trying to broaden things. And it's not just the content, it's also pedagogy. So when we talk about arts integration, when we talk about the intelligences and being able to create these different assessments that more broadly, because honestly, a paper is not always sufficient. There's somebody in this room right now that as I'm speaking, they're thinking, oh, if this is written down, I would be much more able to handle this information. Different students have different needs in terms of that. So we're talking about some certain pedagogical practices, but none of them are, you need to change this. All of them are, what do you see as something you want? So you're absolutely right. If they see a void, if they recognize, if the teachers come back with their scorecard and say, I'm recognizing that my literature is all pretty biased, then what they're going to want to focus on is their literature. If a teacher comes back in and says, when I'm teaching, I only teach in one way, then we're going to focus on the ways that they can broaden their teaching practices. So yeah, we're going from where the teachers need to address things and addressing them. But no, I actually had a chance to talk to the administration about the curriculum. The curriculum is not necessarily a problem. It's just about broadening things and giving students more options and giving teachers more options.
And remember, there's a design feature that teachers have the ability to make material decisions in real time. And so it may not be as simple as finding another text about whaling that isn't set in New England and plugging it in. It is allowing teachers to recognize that Queequeg is the only character of color in Moby Dick, and that may not be a representation that every student in that classroom is connecting to. And so supplementing that characterization by finding other materials, and they may not be the same every year or the same class to class. And that's a design feature because we rely on the skill and the professionalism and the art of the teachers in Guilford. It's why our curricula stand out, and it's why we are the district we are. So I want to be careful that we're not suggesting taking that freedom away. We're in fact helping teachers to feel comfortable and confident, identifying when they need to reach into that freedom and how exactly they do that. We've made progress, but I think Don is helping us to see the places where we can make more and more consistent progress.
For people that might be more, not mentioned, but some of our critics that we hear from, the proposal isn't to not read Moby Dick.
Right.
And say that this is not a good piece of literature. It's to highlight and add things to it. And show this is written a long time ago. It wasn't.
We're not tearing down statues in Melville. No.
That's just something.
If a teacher decides that a text that they're using is problematic, I would not recommend to them to just remove the text. And I was thinking about, vocabulary events and those other texts. I think there is a way, if we're talking about critical thought, I think there's a way to critically analyze what the problematic parts are. Yep. And you can do it without, repeating the slurs. You can still analyze. You can still make it so that it's something that students feel safer with, and the students can still analyze what might be problematic. I think when you start removing things from the equation, then what you start to do is kind of shift the problem over. You're not actually addressing. If there's an issue, it needs to be addressed. You can't address it behind it. So when people, especially in college, when people talk about To Kill a Mockingbird, nobody's talking about I should never use this book again. They're talking about let's include these other texts, let's include these other ideas that we can use to, and not these other ideas. Here's the important part. Bringing in these other ideas is not saying, okay, To Kill a Mockingbird is bad. Let me tell you why it's bad. So terrible, so terrible. There are literary good things. There are aspects of the writing itself that are quality. If something cannot withstand a critique, then that's the piece itself. So what you're trying to do is allow the teachers the opportunity, and part of the reason that we're doing the audit this way is because we needed to start from the teacher's strengths. What the audit does is it doesn't say, here are all the ways you screwed up. There are teachers who already, I think in our second meeting, they were like, I realize that I'm already doing this and I'm already doing this. And what that does for the teachers is psychologically, it allows them to feel like they're already doing okay. They're already meeting some of the things that they want to meet. And now how do you just build on that? How do you make that even better? How do you flex on those things? And also, how do you become a resource for your peers? But no, we're not talking about moving anything up. The whole idea of broadening perspectives requires that original perspective. Maybe in 20 years, we'll say, remember back when we used that text, or remember back when we had that idea, but we will still have the text to refer back to. We will still be able to analyze that text. And I think that's what me and the teachers and the coaches have been talking a lot about, is being able to really, you want the students to dig into these things. You don't want to start removing things that they can analyze. Is that, I'm sorry.
No, that I was exactly.
Mr. Sands, you've been waiting.
Yes, this question would be for Dr. Freeman. You raised a point which I hadn't focused on, which is that we're doing this audit is primarily with the teachers at a time when the teachers are extremely distracted and stressed. I wonder, given the importance of what we're doing here, if it doesn't make sense to maybe extend the time frame of the audit so that we can get some input from when the teachers are sort of in a more normal state.
I appreciate the comment, and I have always been, I have always assumed that we would need to be flexible in how we have rolled this out. But to Dr. Hirsch's comments about the commentary that we heard from students and parents, and particularly graduates last year, I felt it was important that we committed to beginning this conversation substantially and earnestly, not just poking around the edges, but really committing to a solid beginning. And I think what you're hearing tonight is we have made that solid beginning. If I needed to come back, or if Dr. Crystal needed to come back and report to the board that, you know, we're right on the cusp of June, and the idea of getting the teachers back to do this reporting out needs to be delayed, I think that there would be support among the board and understanding in the community for exactly the point that you just made. And so, you know, I have encouraged Dr. Seiler not to rush through this, to take your time. And I heard him earlier want to name June or July instead of this summer for when the report might be due. Well, I think we're hearing that if it has to be October or November, better. And what we're hearing is just starting the conversation is impacting what's happening in the schools. It's not a.
I think you should take away from this that we're not driven by some schedule that we
Thank you.
set in stone here, and the fact that a lot of the work that's been done has been done at a time that is abnormal for the teachers tells me that maybe we would get a more useful report, and the teachers would have time to be more reflective on this if we were to put this off until the end of the year.
I appreciate that comment, and I suspect that the department chairs in the audience appreciate that comment tonight as well. I can see George smiling behind the mask.
Building on Ted's point, I always understood this to be a multi-year process.
Absolutely,
Number one.
yes,
Number two, what we've heard tonight is a preface.
yes.
We barely got a foot in the water.
Yeah.
Teachers have not yet, well, our students told us that the content of that there's a void, a major void in what they actually learned versus what they thought they ought to learn in light of their experience leaving here. It's not just that we're going to ever be able to simply add things to our curriculum.
Exactly right.
Teachers are working 100% now. If a teacher were to find out through workshops, through more reading, through their own master's degree, or that they're essentially teaching white European social studies, and that there is a universe of literature and history and documents that they now understand ought to be included as part of what students are exposed to. But that if I'm already taking up 100% of my time, I can't just add on to that. I've got to decide on priorities. Do I do less of this, or
Right.
substitute some Asian history here, or some Black history here, or some Native American history? So over time, teachers are going to have to look at what ought to be the case in light of their own new understandings, and how that is discrepant with what they are doing, so that it is an ought kind of thing. And eventually we would expect to see, as a normal course of events over time, with workshops and in-service days and summer fellowships and God knows what we could do. But if teachers really said, we really need a lot more contact with some of this content
Mhm.
and people who are experts. I would expect then that there would be a reasonable amount of fooling around with curriculum that we would see not simply additions, there obviously would be additions compared to what we've got, but that we would see different integrations, different combinations. And that therefore, and that takes, that's a time question, and sort of a confrontation question that each teacher makes in light of new learning. The new learning is only just beginning. They haven't come in contact with 5 Dr. Seilers who are expert in things that we're not teaching.
Well, and again, that is, again, I appreciate the comment, but that is another design feature of the way in which our curricula are written. Our curricula are written in such a way that it allows teachers to never teach the same exact class 2 years in a row. There are very prescriptive curricula that are written, it's a 180-day calendar, and these are all the texts you will use. And teachers in those settings teach that class 10 years over and over and over again until the curriculum itself gets updated and makes a change. Our curricula allow latitude for teachers to evolve their teaching within the curriculum. And you're exactly right. This is going to always be, whenever the report is issued, it will be old the day after it's dated, because our curricula are always evolving. Well, our instruction is always evolving. A curriculum is written. It's written in a way to allow latitude, and our teachers don't teach the same exact course
But
2
the
years in a
report
row.
we'll be getting, as we heard it today, won't talk in depth at all about a curriculum analysis of what we're doing, much less a pedagogical analysis. It will report what teachers are claiming they are doing and not doing. That's a different kind of analysis than if in fact we move the conversation to what ought we be doing that we're not doing that, and what do we need to get there, kind of thing, which might take another year or two. And so we might find that if you had 20 teachers get together for 3 weeks in the summer across disciplines with some experts in a variety of things that deal with difference, you could get a lot of different new curriculum coming out that might take them a year or two to get together, that they'd be excited and energized about, but which they're not going to come about generally isolated one by one, but certainly not as a function of the data in this first report.
I think this helps move us. I think that the
Oh, no,
the teachers are reflective enough that they, and I do appreciate the opening of this door. I appreciate the comments that we're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, it does, sorry, it does, I mean, but it does sound like that this approach was self-reflective with tools.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I don't want
Lots
to
of tools,
lose
yeah.
that piece of it. I mean, it did sound like that there were tools that helped the conversation. And, you know, I guess you're already speaking to this. I mean, I don't think of it as particularly static, right? I
No.
mean, I think there's constant, and Dr. Seiler, correct me if I'm wrong, but and this doesn't surprise me because this goes on a lot in this district. It also sounded like it wasn't just self-reflection, but there's opportunities for sharing, right? For teachers to share those discussions.
I will say that and I completely agree with you. I think that as a first step, the goal needs to be like the way that you get buy-in from teachers and the way that you really help teachers to feel like they're a part of it is by letting them reflect on their own practice.
Absolutely.
And letting them kind of dig in and actually giving them some tools. So we gave them the scorecard, but I also gave them some resources and some ideas and some concepts, and we bandied about some different ways of doing things with students to kind of get them thinking so that they would be able to reflect on their own work, but also be able to either use those resources or go find similar resources. So this is the part where you're just kind of, you know, it's an old standard car and you're pushing it to get it started. This is the part where you just start to build up energy and get things rolling in a way that is more natural for them, as opposed to what the administration was clear about. They didn't want this to be a top-down, here's what y'all need to do thing. This needed to start from, that's why we're starting with teachers, it's starting with students, so that this kind of has that ability of being something where teachers don't feel like it's a flavored among education.
Well, and it sounds like any of us who intend to read this report will hear some of what you heard from students, which will also inform some of this, right? So that I think there's going to be a feeding of information back and forth that could be, or at least unidirectional, that could be very helpful.
And my part as a person who's doing the analysis is to make sure that, so what you won't read is a series of student quotes.
Oh, no, that's important. Thank you.
My point is kind of like the Borland piece that you all had from 7, 8 years ago. 8 years ago. But
Something like that. Yeah, I know, right? Feeling old. Feeling old.
But yeah, very clear ideas about how things are looking and my professional perspective on students said these things, here's how it reflects in terms of things that are happening or can happen in the district. So I'll bring in a lot of the language that I use with the teachers and a lot of the ideas that I use with the teachers to kind of make it clear that the report is not just to say, here's what the kids said, but here are some of the things the kids said, here's how it looks in terms of the research that we know about education, and here's how it can look practically. Here's how it can look in the district. So yeah, the goal is to make sure that there's a clear progression from one step.
And it will only be a marker on the road itself. It will not be a destination. If we choose to look at a different kind of audit and we'll go more deeply or continue building on the internal work, we'll make those decisions. It will be a marker. It won't be a destination.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anybody else? Well, thank you again for coming second
Absolutely.
time. I've been so helpful. Thank you for answering all of our questions. We're really excited to see your report.
And thank you for the work that you've been
Yes.
doing. I'm really,
I genuinely, this is, I mean, the meeting is a meeting, but like the actual work itself is a lot. Talking to the students for hours and just letting them go off a little bit. It feels good for me. I think it feels good for them. Similar with the teachers and the coaches. I think them being able to just talk about the work as opposed to know that somebody's telling them something they have to do. I think it really has. It's making what's happening and what we're doing more authentic, more organic than what usually happens. So I appreciate you all having me come in and letting me do things in a way that feels natural.
and I, depending on we represent a whole variety of different, I guess, professions and careers, but certainly a strength-based approach is a place where a lot of our work starts from, and there's a reason for that, right? I mean, there's a success in it.
It makes a lot of sense. It really does.
And really good to see you in person. Thank you for joining
Yes.
us.
Oh, and thank you for this, right? And we may have, this may have been a fairly last minute in person or required you to be here in a way you hadn't expected, so I appreciate it.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yes,
Crystal?
thank you, Dr. Seiler,
Thank
for
you
coming.
so
Really
much.
appreciate it. I know this was not a close, we don't live, we're not near where you live, so appreciate your driving here. So the next item on the agenda is to have Ms. Chaff and Mr. Cooksey talk to us about sophomore English.
I'm really going to turn it over to Mr. Cooksey. He came to me, I want to say about a month ago, and proposed an idea that had come from the English department teachers themselves about how we approach curriculum at the sophomore level to start. What we're seeing is that you look at our graduation numbers of students who go on to 2- and 4-year universities, we're usually in the 90% range, somewhere between 90-ish, sometimes it's 89, but 90-ish to 95% of our students are going into post-secondary education settings. So it's clearly a college-bound population of students that we have. And so without belaboring the point, I think we're kind of looking at English 2, sophomore English specifically, as a way to keep our advanced courses intact. So honors English 2 would still be an option. But what the teachers were wondering about, and I'm going to let Mr. Quincy speak to this in more detail, is why are we separating them out into level 1 and level 2 if we know that our students are predominantly college-bound students when they graduate Guilford High School. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Quincy and let him tell a little bit more about that conversation and how that brought us here tonight. Yeah,
Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and thanks for letting me come here to this meeting tonight. If I can just take a minute to just speak a little bit about Dr. Seiler's equity audit. This did not come to us as a sharp change in direction. I just want that to be clear. We've been working on increasing cultural diversity and character diversity in our curriculum for a number of years. The IB program accelerated that, and then Dr. Seiler's work accelerates that even further. So from a teacher's perspective, from my department's perspective, and I'm sure from Ralph's perspective, we welcome this, and this is a real positive shift. It gives us a little more research-based foundation for what we're doing. The conversations we're having in class have already shifted to much more dynamic conversations with the text that we're already working with. So this has been a very positive move for all of us. So in terms of the issue before us now, I think that the department, this has also been years in the making. This isn't something that we just slapped together in a moment. For years, we've noticed that students that were placed into level 2 classes after freshman year is heterogeneously grouped. There are no levels. And then after that, they were placed into level 2, level 1, or honors English as sophomores based on their skill level and their demonstrated ability to read and write and speak. So what we found is that over time, that students that were placed in level 2, some of them started identifying themselves in that way. And we believe started expecting less of themselves, so that by the time they got to junior year and then senior year, there was an erosion of self-efficacy, and that students were, they were harder and harder to push, to kind of challenge because of that. So that was one factor. Teachers were noticing that. We were talking about it. Anine and our department spoke about this last year in a department meeting. And then we also noticed that students that were placed into IB classes from all levels, level 2, level 1, and honors, they all rose to the occasion. And I taught those students, and watching those students come to life in these classes that were very challenging and very rigorous, like that became part of the conversation as well. And we felt that, students in 9th grade do very well overall. We know how to teach them in heterogeneously grouped classes for 9th grade. We feel that we can continue to do that in 10th grade and keep students believing that they should and can be challenged in the ways that we want them to be challenged. So the department as a whole, every single member of our department is a yes or neutral on this. I'd say maybe 1 or 2 neutrals, but most are yes. We want to do this and we want to make it happen. We do want to keep honors as a way for students that really want to accelerate their learning and prepare for maybe careers in humanities and things like that as an option, because that's a much more challenging course than the sophomore level 1 course at this point. So that's what we did, and then Anine and Julia and I had a few conversations about it, and we believe we're ready to make the move, and I think it would be good for kids. I think it would be good for the school, and I think what Julia started with, as we prepare kids for college and universities, most of them are going to go in that direction, not all, but even those who don't, I think that they'll be better prepared to speak and listen and read in ways that are vital for success in this century.
What exactly are you proposing?
So right now we have 3 levels. We have level 2 sophomore English, level 1, and honors. So we would like to collapse level 2 and level 1 into simply level 1 sophomore English. And with the possibility of, if this does happen, moving forward with doing that in junior year and then senior year.
Yes.
So I perhaps completely coincidentally, because no one in my household except me saw the agenda for this meeting. And I've had the opportunity to have both boys who have been out of Guilford High School for 3 years or more. This topic, not about sophomore English, but about level 2 and level 1, came up around our dinner table. And the question was, why do we still have level 2? So I'm just commenting that some former students of Guilford High School were wondering about that. I am very in support of this idea, and the last thing that I want us to do is set students up to feel like we don't expect that they can perform at a particular level and then make that their reality. That to me would be so incredibly disappointing, and we know it happens in various ways. So we did. I'm looking at Dr. Freeman because
We made a similar change in sophomore geometry last year or the year before. We made exactly the same change. And the logic is that if there are going to be gatekeeper courses, you want to push them as late in the student's career as possible so that students don't receive a message from us in their freshman or sophomore year that they're not good at math or that they're not good at English, and that they start making decisions based on that. And the only thing that I want to add to tonight's conversation is that I could not be prouder that this recommendation is coming from the teachers who brought this forward to Julia and to Anine. So to Dr. Seiler's comments about not wanting this to be top down, it is the English department that is making this recommendation to you tonight with my wholehearted endorsement, but without any cajoling. It is coming from the teachers who are recognizing the right thing to do for their students. And I couldn't be more supportive of or proud of this
And
recommendation.
what's especially nice about this is that 30 years of research on learning, maybe 50 years, but certainly 30 years of mastery says that within a normal range of intelligence and good teachers, students invariably rise to the level of expectations. Higher the expectations, the higher the learning. It's almost a law of learning. Not that everybody does that, because some kids lose motivation or for other reasons don't do it, but not because they're unable. One could argue, by the way, and something more idealistic, but that we could run, the logic of this is that we could eventually have an IB curriculum 10 through 12, if there were one. Because given this neighborhood, okay, given this, but the fact that you've now, that it is coming from the insurance, just, amen. It's just a wonderful proposal.
Well, and I really like the idea, obviously, as you're proposing it, of giving students who want to go the extra mile the opportunity to do that. But to move from freshman year into sophomore year, where you are, or jumping up if you choose, is a very different, right, process than moving into sophomore year and being, use the word, but being devoted in some. I imagine that could be the way it felt. I don't want to.
And again, to George's point, none of that is to say that a student who is struggling or needs help won't get it, but we know how to, our teachers know how to support and differentiate, and we won't lose the students. We will accelerate all. We won't lose any.
So I'm sorry, just to be clear, what happens in junior and senior year?
So junior and senior year are, they're similar to sophomore year currently. So junior year, there's level 2, there's level 1, and then there's students can choose either AP language or IB literature. So So that continues. But we felt that for this year, it would be best to just start with the sophomores and move it up.
One step at a time.
As they move forward.
I would only add to that that an interesting thing happens in senior year in particular. You will have students who decide they don't necessarily want, they qualify for, but don't necessarily want to take the AP literature course. And then you will also simultaneously have a number of students at the end of their junior year who work really hard to qualify to enter into the level 1 English class. And so those groupings in English 4 level 1 become very heterogeneous all of a sudden.
Naturally.
Anyway, just by the natural progression of the students, 4-year journey through the English department. And so we do have some anecdotal evidence as well to suggest that this can be highly successful in a humanities focused classroom like English. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in as well.
So given that, I'm just help me understand, so why are we still leveling in 11th grade and 12th grade then?
George wanted to take a more, he wanted to take a more gradual approach rather than, again, we're coming off of a very difficult school year for the teachers, for the students. So rather than sort of biting off more than we can chew, to use a tired expression, I think he's sort of looking at it for a more growth approach. Let's do it with this. We already have heterogeneous groupings as
Right.
freshmen.
It doesn't change the deal for any
Move it to
existing
sophomores.
students right now.
And gradually move into the upper grades, pending how things go with the sophomores in particular.
We could watch this grow with the sophomore class. As freshmen, they haven't been leveled. They won't be as sophomores. To change junior and senior year, you will now take students who were leveled and take those levels away, which could be anxiety provoking, which could change what they thought so it's, again,
I
one
see.
step at a time.
So I think that's, if this were a normal year, I'd think more about that possibility of doing it in junior year as well. But there's so much anxiety right now among students. I don't think we want to add to that, especially for students that don't feel confident already, to put them into that situation.
Is there a compromise here? Are students given the choice as to whether they want 1 or 2 in their junior year?
Yeah, so teachers make a recommendation based on the skills that a student has demonstrated. But every year in June and then again in August, parents will contact me and
They've always had that.
override
So
that.
we're
And
not precluding.
as long as they want to do it and they know what's
They're
at
getting
stake, they do it. They can do it. We never say no.
Same applies to AP courses and to a large degree IB courses. Students are not locked out based on those the teachers make recommendations. Students are privy to those recommendations, but a child and their parents can override those recommendations and take an
The reason I
AP.
ask the question is, if parents were watching this tonight and they heard that, in essence, the English department has discovered a new powerful vaccine, which says we've got a better.
But
way
we're
of
not
doing
giving it to
something,
yes.
And we're not, and it will do no harm. And the next question was, well, we got this vaccine, why aren't we just using it for everybody? And the answer is, well, we want to be cautious given this year. But if it turns out that the supposition is correct, that our students can do more than they often think they can, but the teachers think they can do it and will help them, then that means parents and kids could this year, maybe more than they usually would have, choose to go into level 1 because they've heard this. That's
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Parents have always had that latitude. Yep.
That was what I was wondering. If you could choose to go into honors or not.
I just want to add too that when we had a conversation last year, one of the most disheartening comments I heard was teachers saying, and I think George probably remembers this, that level 2 kids come in and have these expectations of themselves.
Right.
Just by virtue of being called level 2,
That's right.
that the kids were coming in saying, I'm a level 2 kid, I don't have to do homework.
That's right.
And those kinds of comments were being made. And I have personal experience with a child in high school who was told to be in level 2 by a recommendation. And then what happened was she spent about 3 months in level 2. and noticed such a difference between level 1 classes and level 2 classes that she begged me never to allow her to go into a level 2 class again. And just listening to the teachers say, you know, my level 2 kids come in and say, I can't do homework because I'm a level 2 kid. How damaging is that to somebody's self-perception as a learner along the way?
Yeah, just like one thing, as you were speaking, I was thinking, like I coach track and field as well, and when kids come onto my team, I have the same expectation. The team has the same expectation of every athlete on the team. And everybody, you know, if you have good leadership among the seniors, everything moves forward and kids improve dramatically over the course of the year and over the course of their career. And I think like when we put a kid into level 2, the more and more we thought about it, the more we're saying that our expectations are, the implication is whether that's actually our expectation, but the implication for the student can be, I don't have to work as hard, I don't have to.
That's exactly right.
I think it's really important to have a culture, and this to me is a step forward in building a culture where our expectations are consistent with the kind of courses we offer to students.
I think what's nice about this is that the students in their freshman year aren't leveled. So it doesn't seem like you're gonna have to make a lot of changes, or the teachers won't have to, you know, make adjustments, you know, next year necessarily. Am I right about that? I mean, do you see any changes that you have to make or more resources?
Most of the teachers that are currently scheduled to teach sophomore English have taught freshman English at some point, so they're well acquainted with how to handle that kind of classroom.
Mhm.
So I'm very confident that we'll be able to handle this professionally and compassionately.
Do we have levels in social studies, in our social studies classes? The kids in the sophomore year take level 1 or level 2?
Yes, but what we're finding is those levels have gradually begun to collapse. So again, by the time students are taking their junior and senior electives, junior year is US history, their senior year electives, all of the social studies electives now are running at level 1 because the students were co-seated at level 1 and level 2, and you could contract up, so to speak, to take it as a level 1 class. And the entire classes, the entire roster were basically, this was several years ago now, we're electing to take it at level 1. And so we're not even running those electives at level 2 any longer.
What about sciences?
The sciences are still level 1, level 2. And we are looking at, for the first time, just because of sectioning requirements, we're looking at running physics level 1 and level 2 co-seated as well with that same contract approach. That's been common in the science department for a number of years, so that the student has more say in at what level they want to take the course. We're going to kind of look at that physics model to see how that looks more broadly across the discipline. We've also found with environmental science, for example, that initially we ran mostly level 1 sections of it, and then when we started to offer the dual credit ECE course with UConn, we're now running many more sections of the ECE course because so many students are electing to take that early college experience as seniors. So the students are beginning to, I think, have a lot more say in that 4-year trajectory and how they want that to look on their transcripts. So I'm hopeful that we're moving toward a place where you're going to see this becoming more common.
Again, to George's point, this is a step in moving towards that culture. To my earlier point, this is coming from the teachers this year. This is not a year that we would be bringing this forward as an administrative fiat and talking with you about it. So I think we probably even cautioned the English department about, do you want to take this on this year? And they do. So we are enormously supportive of that. But we want to, again, be cautious about having those conversations tonight. Happy to have those conversations, however, in the very near term.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I think that covers our agenda for tonight.
It was a rich agenda.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
This is a level one agenda.
Yeah, I think it was. Might have even been honors. I don't know. So we should have a motion to adjourn. Thank you.